Hello and welcome to our Spotlight webinar with Syxsense. Our topic for today is Stop Wasting Time and Valuable Resources on Manual Compliance Fixes. Automate with Syxsense. This afternoon, we have our industry expert, Graham Brooks, here to give us an inside look into this topic. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and Graham will reach out after to answer those. And with that, Graham Brooks.
Thanks, Joe. Full disclosure for everyone today, I'm recovering from a cold, so my voice is going to be a little bit rough, so just bear with us. Today, I have the pleasure of walking through CIS. We're going to walk through both what CIS is, and then also why it matters, and then finally, how you can manage CIS enforcement through Syxsense. So with that in mind, let's walk briefly through our agenda. First, we're going to talk through some of the compliance challenges, and then we're going to talk through some of the automation that's starting to become normalized in our industry. And then we're going to show you what it looks like, Syxsense in action, how you'd actually deploy some of this content. So with that in mind, let's start by walking through CIS as a standard. First thing you need to know, CIS stands for the Center for Internet Security. It's a nonprofit organization, and it provides best practices for cybersecurity across a wide range of arenas. It's not just for endpoints, it's not just for Windows. They provide all sorts of different standards and best practices. And the main goal of CIS is to help organizations protect their assets from cyber threats by introducing better postures. And when we talk about postures, mostly what we are referencing is controls on a laptop or on a domain controller or on a network switch, making sure that ports are open that should be, that ports aren't open if they shouldn't be, maybe making sure that a VLAN has the correct constraints. All of those things are going to be within the scope of CIS. And within that CIS framework, you have things called benchmarks. Each benchmark represents an individual control that represents a change that is recommended. And these benchmarks are developed by an international and global community of experts who all agree on the standards. So it's not just something that one random person says on the internet and that becomes a standard. You actually have a community of expertise that are going and evaluating each control individually and agreeing, yes, this seems to be the best posture possible. And what's really great is this provides a useful roadmap for organizations to kind of gauge their compliance against. If you are compliant with CIS, that means you're also going to be compliant usually with a lot of other controls like NIST or ISO controls, just because they're usually fairly normative to those other platforms. So the goal of all of this is to become CIS compliant. And if you are adhering to the benchmarks and you're evaluating them regularly and you're going through the motions of ensuring your devices and your networks conform to those standards, you by default become CIS compliant. There's no great parade that happens when you become CIS compliant. It's just being able to know, hey, these are some pretty nominal standards that most organizations should comply against. I meet those compliance standards, therefore I have a relatively healthy posture for my devices. Okay, so Syxsense, we are going to provide a lot of utility around CIS. There's a couple really specific elements here. There's going to be the reporting element. The phrase that I always return to is if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So you need to be able to have compliance reporting showing you that you have CIS level 1 or CIS level 2 enforcement in your environment. That's another term that's important to note. CIS is not just one standard. There's a bunch of different standards. The two that we use within Syxsense right now are level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is pretty much just a blanket statement for most organizations. If you have endpoints that have data that you care about, you should probably try to achieve CIS level 1. CIS level 2 is a bit more harsh. CIS level 2 is going to be more restrictive, greater requirements, more time to implement. And the reason why you might want to is if you have a deeper level of regulatory requirements and you want to make sure that you can comply to those standards, you might use a CIS level 2 enforcement. So those are the reporting elements that we provide. But then there's also the implementation. We provide benchmarking against CIS level 1 and level 2. And then we also implemented recently DSA STIGs, which is a different standard, but still useful and relevant. And so we can benchmark, which means essentially scan and evaluate your devices to ensure that they comply against those standards. And then finally, we also do custom benchmarking. So if you want to make your own criteria, your own set list of evaluations, you can do that too. So it could be a combination of level 1 and 2 and DSA STIGs. And then finally, we have automation. So you can go through a process of evaluation with your reporting to find out what's wrong using those benchmarks. And then you can use our automation tool sets within Syxsense to go forth and deploy remediations against your assets and ensure compliance against those standards. And this is a cyclical process. It's not something that happens once. It's something that needs to happen on an ongoing basis. And there's actually a new framework, a new function within the IT industry that provides all of this. It's called the Unified Endpoint Management Framework. Syxsense, our platform, is a part of the Unified Endpoint Management Framework. That's what our product does. It allows you to provide a reference point. So all of your reporting, it allows you to provide benchmarks against standards and then also deploy remediations against those standards. There's a lot of tools that are going to check specific elements of those boxes, but if they don't have the ability to take you through the full life cycle of management, then they aren't going to be classified as a unified endpoint management platform. And that's what Syxsense does. So with that in mind, I'm going to transition from sharing this slideshow over to the console, and we're going to take a look at what it would look like to remediate items within CIS level 1 and CIS level 2. So you should now be able to see the Syxsense console. Just a brief refresher for anyone who's not familiar. Architecturally, we are a cloud-hosted platform with an agent-based deployment. And that agent will live on any asset that you want to manage. And we currently manage devices that are laptops, desktops, and servers. So anything that's running a traditional like Windows, Linux, Mac operating system, we're not going to be responsible for routers or switches or APs. So that's architecture. Today, we want to focus in on CIS compliance. So if I go over to my vulnerabilities tab here on the left-hand sidebar, you can see that I've got all of our patch content, which we're all familiar with, but then we also have our security library as well. Underneath security, if I go down to CIS benchmarks, you can see that I've got about 573 items specifically in this library. And all of these items are currently approved, meaning that they're available and ready to be used in a remediation. If I select any one of these items, it's going to give me an overview of this particular enforcement. And there's a lot here. I don't know all of these CIS compliance items. There's no reason to memorize them, but it's useful to be able to see each item individually and understand what's going on. So here we have saved passwords data import is not disabled. This is a level 1 compliance. Remember, level 1 is a standard that most organizations should be conforming to. Level 2 is a more stringent standard. And I can see that I've got one device that's currently vulnerable. It's missing this standard. And I've got 2 devices that are secure against it. If I select the View Details button, it's going to give me some more information, essentially walking me through the impact, severity, why you should care, why I should fix it. And then should you want to do so manually, you have a solution workflow you can walk through to fix the issue on your own. That said, we don't really want to do that. We don't like manually resolving anything. We would much prefer to be able to do so automatically. And to that end, we do have a resolution workflow. This is just a simple process that'll take me through scanning a device for the vulnerability. So it evaluates against that specific benchmark to see if we can find an instance that's missing that particular benchmark. If we discover that there is an instance missing the benchmark, then we have a payload. It's just a C# script that will go through and change a registry key. Same thing that we did here in this workflow, except it's all automated. You don't have to do any of the work yourself. And then once we're done, we just reevaluate the device. So we're reconfirming that the endpoint is secure against that standard. And this repeats across 500 or more items of compliance that you might need to enforce. So that's what it looks like. But how would it actually look to deploy this in my environment, maybe at scale? First thing I'd want to do is I'd like to create a query so I can sort and filter down to just the enforcement that makes sense. So in here, I'm going to go into my filtered vulnerabilities list, and I'm going to create a new query here, and we're going to look for CIS level 1. So I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call it CIS level 1, and I'm going to change it from patch content to security scans. And then here under field, I'm going to go down to the patch name, and I'm going to look for the name of the patch. And I'm going to change the operator to like, so it should find anything that's similar to CIS level 1. And this is going to be inclusive of a lot of content. So if I did that correctly, which looks like I did, I should now have a bunch of, CIS level 1 items listed here. So this is all my base content for CIS. I'm going to save that query, which we now can see here, CIS level 1, all of that content. And now I'm going to create a task that I'm going to schedule out on a cadence. So it'll go and look at my devices, see if it can find any endpoints that are missing any of those CIS compliance items, and then automatically remediate them. And so to do that, I'm going to go over to the tasks tab on the left-hand sidebar. I'm going to hit the create button in the top. I'm going to select the security resolve button. From here, I'm then going to select a list of devices, and I'm going to choose my internal organization. I'm going to go into my California and into my Idaho locations and select my end user device list. So these are laptops mostly. Then I'm going to hit save. So those two locations are now targeted. And then I am going to select a query, and I'm going to tell it to look for all of my CIS level 1 content. So we're not looking at everything under the sun. We're just looking for that 400 something list of content that's relevant for CIS level 1. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose a timeline. When do I want this work to happen? If you've done patching with Syxsense before, all of this should be fairly familiar to you. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just inventing a new way to push content to your devices using the same framework that you're familiar with. And so we're going to schedule this to run during a maintenance window, which is something that happens on a cadence, maybe once a week or once a month. And here, I'm going to tell it to run once per month. I'm going to tell it to run maybe every second Thursday of the month. And we'll do this mid-afternoon. So at 2 p.m., so 1400 hours for 4 hours. Some of these remediations might take a bit longer than others. So I want to make sure that I have a decent window in place for this remediation path. Then we will hit, oh, actually, I need to give it a new name. Sorry. So let's call this internal user devices CIS enforcement. There we go. All right. So now we hit save. We have that workflow. It's going to run every month on the second Thursday of the month at 2 p.m. until looks like 6 p.m. So here I hit save. have this new enforcement. I'll hit finish. And now this enforcement is going to live in perpetuity in my environment every month, just evaluating my devices, ensuring that they meet my compliance standard. So that's a lot of really good value right there. In recap, if you've been doing CIS enforcement manually, you're probably familiar with the pain of having to go through the list of all of those requirements, going through them and writing PowerShell scripts or C# scripts yourself that remediate each and every one of those items. That's relevant anymore. You now have a process within Syxsense that'll do all of that work for you. All you have to design is a set of devices and a set of resolutions that you want to enforce. Syxsense will do everything else for you. It's a huge amount of time savings. I actually personally was responsible for CIS enforcement on a Linux environment of about 300 devices earlier in my career. That enforcement was about a 50-hour a month commitment for the first few months of our engagement. Later, as we built out all of our requirements, the requirements made it a little easier. So I was spending more like maybe 5 to 10 hours a month on those enforcement requirements. But early on, it was a huge amount of work. With Syxsense, that whole story arc can be simplified dramatically because we have all of that content pre-baked. You don't need to spend as much time doing the work yourself. You just inform your users, hey, we're doing this new thing. You might see some changes to how your device behaves. For example, your lockout. You might, instead of getting to leave your computer unlocked for 3 hours in the afternoon while you're away at lunch, now it's going to be locking after just 10 minutes. That's a CIS level 1 enforcement item for you. So a lot of really awesome value there. Last thing that I want to walk through before we close today is reporting. What does it look like to get a report showing you your compliance around CIS? Right here, I have already built out one of those reports. It's our CIS benchmark report, and it'll just show you each and every item. So every single CIS level 1 or CIS level 2 item, which you can filter this down. So it doesn't have to just show everything and show just one level. I can see all of my devices that are compliant. And as I go through, I can even also find devices that are non-compliant as well. And I can even filter this down and say, just show me devices that are non-compliant against the standard. And for each and every one of these items, we do have a link to the enforcement. So if you need to understand it better and figure out why this particular CIS enforcement matters, we have that list in there for you. So that's a brief overview of our enforcement and how Syxsense can help with CIS. If anyone has questions, I would love for you to reach out to the team at Syxsense, and we will answer them as best we can. And with that, I would like to offer the opportunity to have a conversation with us. If you haven't been doing CIS enforcement, please feel free to reach out to info@syxsense.com or give us a phone call, and we will set up a session to walk through what CIS enforcement could look like for your team using the Syxsense platform. With that in mind, have a great rest of your day.